My name is Mavis Langley. I always believed that love was best expressed through giving, through sacrifice, through the small things people never notice, like folding laundry without being asked, or remembering how someone likes their tea. But the biggest act of giving in my life wasn't small. It was monumental, and it cost me more than I imagined. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. Let's start from the beginning. My house was never just a house. It was where I nursed my husband through his final illness. It was where I raised my daughter Lily, teaching her how to spell responsibility by gluing letters on the fridge 1 week at a time. It was where the old maple tree in the front yard still dropped its leaves every October in a ritual older than our griefs and younger than our hopes. When Lily got married, she and her husband bounced between rentals for years. Nothing ever stuck. Moldy bathrooms, noisy neighbors, evictions. And then came the baby. A sweet, sleepy boy with colic and a smile that felt like sunlight. I watched her worry lines deepen, watched her become tired in ways I remembered from my own youth, and that's when I knew what I had to do. I would give her the house. It wasn't a decision made in a moment. I lay awake for weeks asking myself, can I afford to let go? Will I regret this? But then I would see her juggling work calls while bouncing the baby on her hip, and the decision would make itself again. It'll be a fresh start, I told myself. She needs stability, something she can call her own. And so, one Monday morning, with shaking hands, I signed the deed over to Lily. I gave her everything. The walls I had painted, the floors I had cleaned, the attic still filled with my husband's tools. She cried at first, hugging me tightly, but her tears were more relief than reverence. More thank God than thank you. She moved in that weekend. I, on the other hand, quietly packed my life into boxes and rented a one-bedroom flat across town. A senior living community, not fancy but clean. The manager handed me the keys without asking many questions. I smiled like it was a choice. You're brave, she said, noticing the address I had written as my former home. Not many mothers would do that. I didn't answer. Brave wasn't the word for it. The first few weeks I felt proud. Lily invited me over often. She showed me the nursery she'd painted, sent me pictures of the baby rolling on the living room rug I'd picked out years ago. I'd look at those photos and feel something close to peace. But peace has a way of fading when it's not reciprocated. The first time she canceled our lunch plans, I told myself she was busy. The second time I still excused it. The third time she didn't even bother to reschedule. Slowly, I became a guest in the house I once ruled. She started making changes, removing the kitchen tiles, changing the porch light, even painting the front door. Things I once agonized over, she wiped clean with a stroke of a brush. I thought you liked the old blue door, I said once. Oh, it looked so dated, she laughed. You were always so sentimental, Mom. That word sentimental cut sharper than she knew. I didn't expect a statue in my honor. I didn't want flowers or plaques or posts on social media. But maybe I had expected more than silence. It was a rainy Thursday when I realized I hadn't been invited over in 3 weeks. I texted her that morning. Would love to visit. Missing you and my little grandson. She replied 4 hours later. Crazy day. Maybe another time. No kiss emoji. No heart. Just cold pixels. I stared at the message, a lump forming in my throat. I wasn't sad. Not yet. I was confused. Where had the warmth gone? The gratitude, the awareness of what had been given. I looked around my tiny apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the squeaky floors, the microwave with one working setting, and I asked myself a question I never thought I'd ask. Did I make a mistake? A knock interrupted my thoughts. My neighbor, Mrs. Hamilton, had dropped off some leftover casserole. You look tired, dear, she said. Everything okay? I nodded, smiled politely, and thanked her. But something in my chest felt tight. I poured the casserole into a bowl, watched the steam rise, and whispered to no one in particular. I gave her everything. It's strange how giving can make you feel invisible. After I handed my home to Lily, I expected at least a flicker of shared memory. Maybe she'd ask about the garden I once kept with her father, or the spot on the kitchen wall where we had marked her height each birthday. But as the weeks turned into months, It was as if my fingerprints had been scrubbed from every corner of the place. The only thing that remained of me in that house was the title deed, and even that no longer bore my name. I tried to reason with myself. She's overwhelmed, I'd say. Being a mom, managing her job, the renovations, maybe she's just tired. But something gnawed at the back of my mind. It wasn't just that I wasn't needed anymore. It was that I wasn't seen. One morning, I mustered the courage to visit unannounced. I brought over a small tray of banana bread, Lily's favorite when she was little. I rang the doorbell with a familiar rhythm. 2 short taps, 1 long. It was our little code when she was a teenager. Back then, she would swing the door open with a "Hi, Mama," and a cheeky grin. This time, it was silence. Then footsteps. Then the door opened just a crack. "Mama, what are you doing here?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. "I was just in the area," I lied. "Thought I'd drop this off." "Banana bread, still your favorite." She smiled weakly. "Thanks." "Sorry, I'm just in the middle of a call. Maybe next time we can catch up properly." I nodded and handed her the tray. But before she closed the door, I caught a glimpse of the hallway. My hallway. Or at least what used to be. Now it was painted stark white with abstract art on the walls, and a sleek new console table where the family shoe rack once sat. There were no photos, no sign of childhood, no history, just neutral space. I walked away slowly, the autumn wind nudging my cardigan like a concerned friend. By the time I got home, I couldn't even remember if she had said thank you. Over the next few days, I started to notice something else. Something harder to swallow. My bank account. The money I had used to pay off the remaining mortgage before gifting the house had drained most of my savings. I hadn't wanted to burden Lily with monthly payments. Let her start fresh, I had said to myself. Let her breathe. But now I was the one suffocating. My retirement pension wasn't enough to cover rising rent, utilities, and prescriptions. I had to cancel my yoga classes, trim down my grocery list, and even sell a few pieces of my jewelry online. I told myself it was temporary, just until things even out. One evening, while boiling lentils for the 3rd night in a row, my phone buzzed. It was a group text. Photos of Lily and her husband at a wine tasting retreat in Napa Valley. Matching robes. Vineyard views. A caption that read, "Best weekend ever." I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was hollow. This was the same girl who once cried in my arms because her shoes didn't match on picture day. The same girl who once asked me at age 5 if we could live together forever. When did forever expire? I didn't reply to the text. I simply muted the group and turned off the phone. That night, I slept in a house that creaked differently than mine ever did. A place that smelled faintly of disinfectant instead of cinnamon and books. And I dreamed of my husband. He was in the garden wearing his sun hat and digging up weeds. He looked up and said, "You always give more than you should, Maeve. Maybe it's time to keep something for yourself." I woke up before I could answer him. The next morning, I opened a small wooden box in my closet and took out a letter I had written to myself years ago. It was something my therapist once told me to do. Write a love letter to your future self for when you're feeling lost. I unfolded the creased paper. "Dear Mavis, if you're reading this, it means you've given too much again. Remember, you are more than what you give. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to be seen." I sat there for a long time reading those lines over and over. Then slowly I folded the letter back up and whispered, "Maybe it's time I start listening." A week after rereading that letter, I decided to drop by the house again. Not unannounced this time, I called ahead like a polite stranger. Lily answered on the second ring. Her tone was distracted, like someone already halfway through a to-do list. "Oh, hi, Mom. Is everything okay? I just thought maybe I could stop by," I said gently. "I'd love to see the baby." She paused. I could hear the clack of her keyboard in the background. "Well, we've got the contractor in today, Mom. They're redoing the backyard, removing the rose bushes, and putting in a hot tub. It's a bit of a mess right now." I said nothing for a moment. The rose bushes, the ones her father had planted before he passed, the ones that bloomed every spring, wild and unruly with thorns like tiny guards around beauty. She used to pick them for her teachers. She used to call them Daddy's flowers. "Oh, I managed. I didn't know you were changing the yard." She gave a quick laugh. It's not really functional, Mom. You know, it's time for an upgrade. An upgrade. It settled into my chest like wet cement. Well, I said finally, maybe another time. Sure. Love you, she chirped before hanging up. I sat for a long time in silence. And then I cried. Not because the roses were gone, not even because I wasn't welcome that day, but because I suddenly realized the gift I gave was never received the way it was intended. To me, that house was memory, love, labor, grief, and growth. To her, it was just real estate. That evening, I took out an old photo album. Not digital, not curated for Instagram, just thick pages with real photos, real smudges, real time. There we were. Lily, maybe 7 years old, riding her bike for the first time on our driveway. Her dad running beside her and me in the background, holding my breath. There was the birthday party in the backyard with balloons that kept popping in the heat. There was Christmas morning on the staircase. All of us in flannel pajamas laughing. Every wall, every corner of that house held a version of me she'd never know again. The next day I stopped by a bank. I wanted to see if I could take out a small loan. Nothing big, just enough to cover some medical bills and perhaps a trip. A trip to somewhere quiet. Maybe Oregon. I had always wanted to see the coast. But when the clerk pulled up my information, he frowned. "I'm afraid your credit is stretched thin, Mrs. Langley." I blinked. "I had a savings account here." He nodded. "Yes, but the recent mortgage closure and transfers depleted most of it." "I'm sorry." I thanked him and walked out slowly. Across the street was a cafe I used to take Lily to after school. She always ordered hot cocoa with extra whipped cream. I went in and ordered one for myself, sat in the corner booth, drank it slowly. Then I took out my phone. I texted Lily, "Hey love, just checking in. Can I talk to you about something? It's important." No reply. An hour passed. Then 2. When she finally responded, the message was short. "Today's packed. Can we talk later this week?" No warmth. No urgency. Not even a question mark. I stared at it, knowing full well that later this week would become next week, and then maybe next month. I felt like an old piece of furniture, useful when needed, invisible when not. That night, as I lay on my narrow bed, I began composing a letter in my head. Not like the one I had written to myself. This one was for Lily. Not to guilt her, not to scold. Just to explain, because if she couldn't see the sacrifice, maybe she could read it. I wrote it the next morning. 4 handwritten pages, simple and honest. I told her what the house meant to me. What it cost me, not just in dollars, but in identity. How I had hoped the gift would bring us closer, not create distance. How I missed her. Missed being a part of her life. Missed being more than just Mom, the woman who gave her a house, and then quietly disappeared. I didn't ask her to return anything. I didn't ask for money or thanks or even time. I just asked to be seen. I sealed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox. My hands trembled slightly as I let it fall through the slot. Then I walked back to my apartment, my home now, a modest place with peeling paint and creaky floors. But it was mine. Every corner was filled with new quiet. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of someone finally choosing herself. 3 days passed without a word. I checked the mailbox twice a day, even though I knew she wouldn't reply by letter. I checked my phone more often than I'd like to admit. I reread the message I'd sent, the one that said, "Can I talk to you about something?" hoping I missed a hidden kindness in her delay. But there was nothing. On the 4th evening, I heard a knock at my door. For a moment, I hoped, really hoped it was her. But when I opened it, I found my neighbor Janice from 2 doors down, holding a plastic bag, with a smile that was kind, but pitying. "I made too much soup," she said. "And I know how you hate cooking on rainy days." It wasn't raining, but I smiled, thanked her, and invited her in. We sat at my tiny kitchen table while the soup warmed on the stove. She talked about her cat's surgery, her daughter in Minnesota, and the church rummage sale next weekend. I nodded, smiled where I should, and made all the right sounds. But inside, my heart felt like paper left out in the rain. Soft, unreadable. That night, I took a walk, just around the block. I passed by a thrift store with a flickering neon sign. Then the community center with a new banner advertising creative aging workshops. I paused there. The sign was cheerful, hand-painted, slightly crooked. I walked inside. There were rows of flyers pinned to a corkboard. and the faint smell of coffee and dust. A young woman with frizzy hair and a bright scarf looked up from the desk. "Hi there," she said. "Looking for anything?" I hesitated, then pointed to the banner. "Do you still have spots open?" "For the storytelling group." "Absolutely. First session is tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Storytelling." I thought about all the stories I had stored in me about the old house, the way Lily used to play dress-up in my high heels, how my husband would hum Sinatra while trimming the hedges. Stories no one seemed to want anymore. "Great," I said. "I'll be there." The next morning, I sat in a circle of 7 women, most with gray in their hair, and something unspoken in their eyes. The facilitator, a former theater actress, asked us to share a moment we thought we had lost forever. I told the group about the garden, about the rose bushes my husband planted and how they were pulled up last week to make room for a hot tub. I didn't cry, but when I finished, the room was quiet. Someone reached over and touched my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. That sounds like it meant everything. It did, and for the first time in months, I felt understood. When I got home that afternoon, I had a text from Lily. "Hey, got your letter. Didn't know you were feeling that way." Just that. No apology. No, I'm sorry. Just an acknowledgement. It felt like she had read a recipe without bothering to taste the dish. I responded, "Thank you for reading. I didn't write it to make you feel bad. I just wanted you to understand." She replied, "Yeah, things have been crazy. I'll call soon." That was it. I stared at those words, and something shifted inside me. Not anger, not disappointment, just clarity. She's not ready to see me. Maybe she never will be. And that had to be okay. The following weeks felt lighter. I went to storytelling class every Tuesday. I joined a walking group on Thursdays. I bought myself a new scarf, turquoise, my favorite color, which Lily always said looked a little too loud on me. I wore it anyway. One day, as I passed by the house, her house now, I noticed a for sale sign on the lawn. I stopped in my tracks. The house looked so different. Painted gray now with sleek black trim and artificial grass in the yard. The roses were long gone, replaced by a minimalist fountain that gurgled quietly. I texted her, "Selling the house?" She replied 2 hours later, "Yeah. Got an offer we couldn't refuse. Moving closer to the city. Better schools." I typed, then deleted a dozen different replies. In the end, I said only, "I hope you find peace wherever you go." She responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Just that, a tiny digital hand that felt like the final nail in a door quietly closing. But this time I didn't feel erased, because I realized something important. I didn't lose my home the day I signed that deed. I lost it the day she stopped remembering who I was inside it. And that memory, that version of me, I had carried her with me all along. The house was gone now. At least that's how it felt when I walked past it again and saw the moving truck in the driveway. Strangers, young, laughing, oblivious, were carrying boxes through the front door. I watched as one of them nearly dropped a floor lamp I recognized. It used to sit in the corner of the study next to my husband's reading chair. No one noticed me standing there on the sidewalk. And maybe that was for the best. I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Past the house, past the memories, past the versions of myself I had buried in those walls. Back at my apartment, I boiled water for tea and took out the letter I'd written to Lily. The original. I had saved a copy. I reread it slowly. Every word still rang true, but this time, instead of sadness, I felt something else. Closure. It was like hearing the final note in a long song, melancholy but complete. A few days later, I was tidying up when I came across the box of keepsakes I'd stashed in the back of my closet. Inside were old birthday cards, faded Polaroids, a lock of Lily's hair from her first haircut. I held it between my fingers and smiled. Even if she had forgotten, I hadn't. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop expecting someone to change. You don't stop loving them, but you stop living in the gap between what is and what you wished would be. I had spent months waiting for Lily to understand, to see the sacrifice, to say thank you, to mean it. But she wasn't built for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I couldn't keep handing her my piece, hoping she'd give it back. That night, I wrote a list. It wasn't long. Just 3 things I wanted to do that had nothing to do with being a mother or a wife or a giver. Go to the coast and watch the waves crash until I felt small in a good way. Write my own story from the beginning, not the one people think they know. Plant something. Anywhere. A seed that was mine and mine alone. The next morning, I called a local travel agent, booked a ticket to Cannon Beach in Oregon for the following month. Then I walked to the community garden behind the library and signed up for a plot. You planting tomatoes or herbs? The woman at the desk asked with a wink. Roses, I said. She paused. That's not easy. I know. She handed me the form. You're brave. This time I believed her. I started spending my mornings in that garden, digging, planting, coaxing life out of dry soil. My knees ached, my hands got rough, but I didn't care. Every thorn I pulled reminded me that beauty is often guarded. And that's not a flaw. It's a design. The first time a bud appeared, just a hint of red still curled in on itself, I almost cried. Because it wasn't a memory this time. It was the beginning. Around that same week, I got a call. It was Lily. Hey, she said. We're settled in. Things are good. I thought maybe we could meet up sometime. I waited. I know I haven't been great at responding, she continued. But I read your letter again. And I think I get it now. Or, at least I want to try. There it was. Not a flood of apologies. Not the perfect resolution. But a door. Not slammed shut. Not wide open. Just unlocked. And this time I wasn't rushing to enter. I'd walk in when I was ready. I'd like that, I said. She asked if I wanted to come see the new place. Maybe I replied, but I'd love to meet for tea first. Somewhere neutral. Just us. Sure, she said. That sounds nice. And it did. It really did. That afternoon, I brought my journal to the garden and wrote the first line of my story. I gave up my house to my daughter, but I never gave up myself. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't triumphant. It was true. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The day of our tea came like a cautious sunrise. I chose a small cafe on the edge of town, nothing trendy or bustling. Just a quiet place with chipped porcelain mugs and lace doilies under the sugar jars. A place that didn't need to be impressive to feel sincere. I arrived early as I always did. Chose the table by the window, ordered my tea, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, no milk, and placed my hands carefully around the warm cup. I watched the steam rise like a breath from the past I hadn't entirely released. 10 minutes later, she walked in. Lily looked different. Not physically. She still wore her hair in that low, tight bun she favored since college, still favored tan sweaters and high-waisted jeans. But her eyes, something in them seemed softer. Like the bravado had thinned just enough to let something vulnerable peek through. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. She sat across from me, placed her phone on the table face down, which I noticed and appreciated. I wasn't sure you'd want to meet, she admitted, stirring her coffee. No sugar, no cream. Just black. Like she used to pretend she liked when she was 15, because it made her feel grown. I almost didn't, I replied gently, but I'm glad I did. There was a pause. Then she looked up. I read your letter again, she said, her voice careful. I don't think I realized what the house meant to you. I gave a small smile. It wasn't just walls, Lily. It was my life. Your childhood. Your father. My whole story. She looked down at her cup. I thought I was making you proud. You always said you wanted me to have more than you did. I did, I said, but I never meant for that more to mean without me. A tremble passed through her lower lip. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. I messed up, she said finally. I was so focused on surviving, on building something that I didn't see. I was tearing something else down. We sat in that truth. It didn't need to be forgiven in that moment. It just needed to be acknowledged. I wanted to invite you to the new house, she said after a while. It's nothing like the old one. Smaller. Less showy. But it has a garden. I even left a little corner open. Thought maybe you could help me plant something. I exhaled slowly, something in me loosening. I'd like that, I said. We talked for an hour. About the baby who was now saying full sentences and developing a serious obsession with trucks. About her new job, less pressure, fewer hours. About the therapist she'd started seeing who told her she had inherited more than just my cheekbones. You taught me how to give, she said. I just didn't realize I was supposed to learn how to give back too. I reached across the table and touched her hand. It was cooler than mine, thinner, stronger. You're learning now, I said. And that counts. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. Not the distracted, rushed hugs I'd gotten over the last year. This one was long, full-bodied. The kind of hug that makes you wonder if time can rewind even just a little. Back at home, I took off my shoes, made another cup of tea, and sat on the couch. I stared at the little corner where I had placed my new journal. Next to it was a packet of rose seeds, gifted by one of the women at the garden group. I thought about the irony how I once gave up a garden full of blooming roses, and now I was about to plant again. Not for anyone else. Not for legacy, just for me. I opened the journal to a fresh page. Wrote, "Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's a choice we make over and over until it feels like healing." Then I underlined it twice. Later that evening, Lily called again. "Would you come over next weekend?" she asked. "Just us. I thought maybe we could cook something together. Like old times?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed a moment to check with myself first. And when I did, the answer was clear. "Yes," I said, "but only if we make banana bread." She laughed. "Deal." And just like that, something new took root. Not the old version of us. Not a perfect one either. But something real. That Saturday I stood in Lily's new kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flower in my hair, and a smile I hadn't worn in years tugging at the corners of my lips. The space was smaller than the old house, cozier. Light filtered in through sheer curtains, illuminating countertops still cluttered from the morning's rush. But for once, the mess felt lived in, not performative or curated, just honest. Lily handed me the bowl of mashed bananas. "You still like walnuts in it, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Always." "Don't tell me you finally started measuring with spoons instead of instinct." She laughed genuinely this time. "I've grown since my teenage rebellion phase." Slightly. We baked in near silence, the kind that doesn't press against your ribs. The baby played in the next room with blocks, babbling to himself, unaware that his grandmother and mother were slowly knitting something back together in the kitchen. As we waited for the loaf to rise, Lily leaned against the counter and looked at me. Really looked. "Mom," she said, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Why didn't you ever say anything sooner?" "About the house. About how you felt." I took a deep breath. I didn't know how I said honestly. For a long time, I believed love meant staying quiet, sacrificing in silence. I thought if I was loud about my hurt, it would take away from the gift. Lily's eyes glossed over and she looked down. "I think I confused your silence for strength," she said. "It was survival," I replied. The banana bread timer dinged and neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with understanding, not comfortable, not easy, but earned. Finally, she spoke again. "I want to do better, not just with you, with myself. I've been so focused on building a life, I forgot who helped me lay the foundation." Tears welled in my eyes. And not because she was finally saying the right things, but because I could see that she meant them. We shared a slice of the warm banana bread straight from the pan. It was imperfect, slightly overbaked at the edges, a bit too sweet, but it tasted like home in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't stay the night. "I could have," she offered, but I declined. Not out of bitterness, but because I had a home of my own now. One I had built not with bricks, but with boundaries. Not with sacrifice, but with self-respect. Before I left, she walked me to the garden corner she'd saved. Just a patch of soil, nothing more. But there, beside a small stone Lily had painted with the baby's initials, sat a new rose bush. Still young, barely rooted. She looked at me shyly. "I don't know if I planted it right." "You'll learn," I said. "They're tough, but worth it." She smiled. "Like you." I kissed her forehead and turned to leave. The air was cool, soft against my skin. I walked down the driveway, slowly, not turning around. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because I didn't need to look back anymore. Somewhere inside, something had finally closed. And something else tender and tentative had opened. When I got home, I poured myself a cup of tea, lit a candle, and pulled out my journal again. I wrote, "It wasn't the giving that broke me. It was the silence that followed. But silence can grow things too, like wisdom, like new beginnings." And then I rested my pen. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother trying to be understood. I felt like a woman who had given, survived, and still had more life left to write. The next week, I returned to the community garden. The sun was gentle that morning, just warm enough to make the earth soft, not yet harsh enough to sting. I brought my gloves, my small trowel, and the packet of rose seeds I'd been saving since February. The corner plot, once a neglected square of stubborn soil, was now mine. I'd cleared it weeks ago, carefully uprooting weeds that had learned to thrive where nothing else would. Now it was bare. Ready, I knelt down and began. There's something humbling about planting something. You know, you might never see bloom. Something liberating too. Because it's not about the result. It's about the act, the intention, the faith. As I worked, I thought of Lily's rose bush, the one she planted in the new yard. I wondered if it was still alive, if she watered it, if her son would grow up knowing that some beauty comes with thorns and that's not something to fear. The thought made me smile. When I finished planting, I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off my knees. My joints complained, but I welcomed it. Pain in its own way is a sign you're still here, still choosing. As I walked back to my apartment, I passed the old library. It was closed for renovations, but the notice on the door mentioned a call for volunteers to help sort books. I didn't even hesitate. I jotted down the email address and smiled at the thought of shelving stories again, of finding myself between pages I'd once offered to others. When I got home, there was a letter in the mail. From Lily. I stood at the threshold, blinking at the envelope like it was some relic from a forgotten world. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still rounded, looping a little too large. Inside was a card. No glitter, no flowers. Just white with blue script. Thank you, Mom, for everything. I'm still learning. And then, handwritten. I found the photo album. The one with Dad in the garden and me on the bike. I cried. Not because I missed the house, but because I finally saw what it held. You were always there, even in the background. I'm sorry it took me this long to notice. Love. Lily. I sat down. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because some words carry weight. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that settles in your bones, reminding you what matters. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I placed the card on my shelf next to a framed photo of my younger self. I looked into the eyes of that woman, fresh-faced, hopeful, still learning how to carry the world without losing herself. I see you now, I whispered. That evening, I took out my journal again. This time, I didn't write a reflection. I wrote a letter to Lily. Not to send, just to write. Dear Lily, you were never ungrateful, just unaware, and I perhaps was too quiet in my giving. But we are here now. Two women grown in different soil, learning how to bloom beside one another. Let's not waste any more seasons. Love. Mom. I closed the journal and let it rest on my lap. Outside, the wind was starting to change. Summer was easing into fall. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but I could feel the shift in the air. That subtle warning that things will soon let go, and that it's okay. Letting go isn't losing. It's making room. Later that week, I got an email from the library. I was scheduled to help unpack a shipment of donated books the following Friday. I added it to my calendar, smiling. I was building a life again, piece by piece. Not one defined by what I gave away, but by what I chose to keep. And this time, I was choosing myself. Friday came with the promise of rain. The clouds rolled in like old stories, gray, familiar, heavy with memory. But I didn't mind. I pulled on my wool coat, tucked my gloves into my pocket, and made my way to the library. It had been nearly a decade since I last walked through those doors as anything more than a visitor. Back when I was still working there, I knew every creaking floorboard, every child's name on Tuesday, story hour, and exactly how to coax the finicky scanner into working on cold mornings. Now I was just Mavis Langley, volunteer, and that felt right. Inside, the air smelled the same, like paper and dust and something sacred. I checked in with the program coordinator, a young man named Jamie, who looked barely older than Lily had when she graduated. He handed me a box cutter and pointed me toward the back, where the donated books were stacked high. For the next few hours, I sorted fiction, nonfiction, classics, books so worn their titles had vanished, books that had never been opened. I ran my fingers along the spines, whispering their names like old friends. The Secret Garden, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, The Velveteen Rabbit, Each one held lives. I had once lived alongside strangers who became characters, then memories. At one point, I found a children's book I remembered reading to Lily when she was 6, The Giving Tree. I stared at the cover, suddenly unsure whether to smile or cry. That story had always troubled me. A tree that gives everything its apples, its branches, its trunk, until nothing remains but a stump. And the boy, now old, finally returns to sit, to rest. As a child, Lily thought it was sweet. As an adult, I saw the grief in it. Maybe that's what we do, inherit stories too soon, only to understand them far too late. I tucked the book into the donation pile and kept going. Around noon, I took my lunch break, sat by the window with a thermos of soup and a hard-boiled egg I'd brought from home. Across the street, the rain had begun, slow, thoughtful. The kind of rain that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Just then, my phone buzzed. A photo from Lily. It was the rose bush, blooming. One single red flower open to the world. Underneath, her message read, "Thought you'd want to see. I didn't kill it after all." I smiled, replied, "Told you they're tougher than they look." She responded almost immediately, "Just like someone I know." There was a time when that would have made me cry, not from sadness, but from the shock of being seen. But now it made me feel steady. That evening, after returning home, I slipped out of my shoes and changed into my soft house sweater, the one with sleeves too long but memories stitched into every thread. I lit a candle, made tea, and opened the window to let the scent of the rain inside. I found myself thinking again about the giving tree. And I realized something. The tree didn't fail because it gave. It only failed because it gave, without asking for love in return. Giving isn't wrong, but giving without boundaries, that's a slow erasure. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Love is not measured by what we give away, but by what we protect within ourselves." Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the glass like gentle applause. I turned off the lights and let the quiet take over. Not the kind of quiet that feels like being forgotten. The kind of quiet that feels earned. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call I didn't expect. Not from Lily this time, but from her husband, Mark. I hadn't spoken to Mark directly in over a year, not since I signed the deed, and they took over the house. We had always maintained a cordial relationship, but not one built on intimacy. He was polite, reserved, and often a little unsure of how to navigate the spaces between Lily and me. "Hi, Mavis," he said, voice cautious. "Hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Not at all," I replied, instinctively bracing myself. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated. "Yes." "Well, I just wanted to say thank you." That stopped me. "For what?" "For the house," he said. "For everything you did." I don't think I ever said it properly. I sank into the armchair by the window. "I appreciate that, Mark. We sold it, as you know," he continued, "and I think Lily's finally starting to see the full picture. She's been quieter lately, reflective. She talks about you more." There was a long pause. "She told me you gave up a lot more than just property," he said gently. I closed my eyes. "I did. I just wanted you to know. It wasn't lost on me. Maybe not then, but now." It was a small gift, this call. Not dramatic, not sweeping, but sometimes grace comes in quiet packages. "Thank you," I said again this time, with a different weight behind the words. After we hung up, I sat in the hush of the afternoon, watching shadows drift across the floor. I felt a soft ache, not pain exactly, just the tug of being seen after years of invisibility. Later that week, Lily invited me to come over for dinner. Not to the new house they were still settling in, but to her in-laws' home where they were staying temporarily. "It's casual," she texted. "Just pizza and board games." A year ago, I might have dreaded that kind of evening, being surrounded by her husband's family, trying to find my place in a room that wasn't mine. But now I felt different. I was no longer measuring my value by how close I stood to her. I was bringing myself, not a sacrifice, not a service, just Mavis. When I arrived, the house was buzzing with activity. Children running through hallways, the scent of garlic and oregano curling through the air. Someone had made a fire in the hearth, and Lily waved me in with one hand while balancing a toddler with the other. "Glad you're here," she called out. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on laps. laughter bouncing off the walls like old music. At one point, someone passed me a slice of pepperoni and said, "Mavis makes the best banana bread. Did you know that?" Lily nodded. She taught me everything I know. I met her eyes across the room. There was no performance in her smile. Just honesty. Later, as we cleaned up together, she handed me a towel to dry the dishes. "Mark told me he called you," she said. I nodded. "He did. He's a good man," she continued. "But I should have been the one to say it first." "You just did," I replied. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I used to think giving was about big gestures. Now I know it's about remembering, about honoring." She looked at me. "And I remember now, Mom. I really do." That night, as I walked back to my apartment under a sky freckled with stars, I realized something else. I had spent so much time hoping to be repaid, not with money, but with recognition, with understanding. But healing doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from becoming the person who no longer needs the apology to move forward. I unlocked my door, stepped inside. The air smelled like rosemary and old books. Familiar, mine. I sat down, opened my journal, and wrote, "I didn't give up my house. I offered it. And even if it took time, the echo of that offering finally returned." Then I turned off the light and let the night hold me. Not as someone who had lost, but as someone who had finally come home. Fall crept in slowly, as it always does in this town. The trees outside my apartment began to shift from green to flame-burnt orange, golden, yellow, a few stubborn leaves still clinging to their summer selves. I walked beneath them on my way to the community garden scarf, wrapped tight around my neck, hands in my coat pockets. The roses had started to close for the season. Most people think roses die in the cold, but that's not true. They rest. They protect themselves. They draw inward so they can bloom again. I understood that now. At the garden gate, I ran into Ruth, one of the other volunteers. She was in her 70s, a former nurse with a wicked sense of humor, and hands always stained with soil. She waved me over to her plot. "Come see this," she said. There, tucked between her rows of lavender and basil, was a tiny sign, planted by the women who stayed. I looked at her, puzzled. "A group I started," she said with a grin. "Unofficial. Just a few of us who've given everything at one point or another, homes, marriages, time. And still stayed. Still grew." I laughed, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep. "Can I join?" "Sweetheart," she said, handing me a spade. "You're already in." We worked side by side in silence for a while. There was something sacred about digging into the earth beside another woman who knew how heavy love could be. Afterward, I walked home with dirt under my nails and something lighter in my chest. At my door, I found a small envelope. It was from Lily. Inside was a Polaroid, a photo of her son standing next to the rose bush, pointing proudly at the bloom. On the back, she had written, "He calls it Grandma's flower." I didn't tell him to. He just decided it was yours. I sat on the steps for a moment, the cool stone grounding me, and let that sentence bloom inside me. He just decided it was yours. Children understand things we adults struggle with. They feel truth long before they can name it. I placed the photo on my kitchen windowsill. It leaned slightly against the glass, catching light every afternoon just before dusk. My own little ritual of remembrance. The next day at the storytelling workshop, we were asked to bring a photo that represented something we'd reclaimed. Most women brought pictures of old lovers, lost homes, or younger versions of themselves. I brought that Polaroid. "This," I said to the group, holding it up, "is not just a flower. It's proof that what we give, when given with love, can still root, even when it takes time." They listened in that quiet, reverent way women do when they know the shape of the pain you're describing. After the session, a woman named Alice came up to me. She was tall, graceful, with eyes that held entire oceans. "I gave my daughter a business," she said. "She sold it last year. Told me she didn't want to run an old woman's dream. I haven't spoken to her since." I placed my hand gently over hers. "We keep dreaming anyway." That night, I dreamed of my old garden. In the dream, it was still wild roses climbing the fence, tomatoes spilling over their cages, bees humming like lullabies. But in the middle stood something new, a single flower, radiant, glowing. It wasn't one I had planted. It had planted itself, and somehow that made it all the more beautiful. Thanksgiving arrived with its usual orchestra of cinnamon butter and quiet tensions. I had declined Lily's invitation this year, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because this year I needed to experience the holiday on my own terms for the first time in decades. Instead, I hosted a small gathering at the community center, a potluck for the in-between, as Ruth called it, a place for those who didn't quite fit into traditional family tables this year. Widows, estranged daughters, overlooked aunts. We brought mismatched dishes and sat at a long folding table lined with paper leaves and handmade place cards. My offering was simple: roasted carrots and a loaf of banana bread. It disappeared before the prayer. During the meal, a woman named Joan asked what we were thankful for, not in the performative go-around-the-table kind of way, but with real curiosity. I didn't answer right away. What was I thankful for? Not for the sacrifice, not for the pain, not even for the eventual recognition, but for what came after. I'm thankful, I said finally, that I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. The table went quiet, but not awkwardly. It was the kind of silence people offer when they're digesting more than food. Later that evening, I found myself walking home through streets glittering with porch lights and half-hearted autumn decorations. I passed house after house filled with the hum of dinner parties, laughter, clinking glasses, music. And for once, I didn't feel like I was standing outside of something. I was simply passing by. When I reached my apartment, there was a voicemail on my phone. It was Lily. "Hey, Mom. I know you didn't come today, and that's okay. But I just wanted you to know. We missed you. I missed you. And I've been thinking about that letter you wrote. About how much I didn't see." Her voice cracked a little. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." I saved the message. Not as proof, not as leverage. Just as a reminder that sometimes people do grow, not on our schedule. But eventually, later that week, I returned to the community garden to prepare my plot for winter. I clipped the last of the dried rose hips and tied the branches gently so they wouldn't snap in the wind. It felt like tucking in a child for a long nap. As I worked, I noticed a small envelope stuck between the slats of the garden fence. My name was written on it in marker. Inside was a note from Ruth. "We're not just women who stayed. We're women who changed. And that's the braver thing." I smiled and tucked the note into my pocket where it stayed for weeks, like a secret talisman. That evening, I wrote in my journal again. Sacrifice without voice is martyrdom. But sacrifice with truth, that's legacy. I didn't know who I'd leave my journal to someday. Maybe Lily, maybe no one. But I no longer needed it to be read to feel real. I had begun writing my story aloud in every conversation, in every refusal to disappear, in every seed I planted with my own hands. And that was enough. Winter arrived like an old friend you hadn't invited, but who knew the way to your door anyway. The wind became sharper, the nights longer, and the garden, once a symphony of colors, now slept beneath a blanket of frost. I didn't mind. I had learned to love the quiet seasons, the ones where growth happens underground, hidden, slow. Inside my apartment, I kept myself warm with tea and books. My windows were lined with paper snowflakes cut by the children at the library. I'd volunteered to help with story hour again, and somehow the scent of crayons and glue sticks had become part of my winter ritual. One Wednesday afternoon, Lily called. "Do you have time for a visit this weekend?" she asked. No pressure. Just, I thought it might be nice. I made soup. I paused, and then smiled. "I'd love to." When Saturday came, I bundled myself in my favorite coat, the blue one with the mended sleeve, and took the bus to her neighborhood. The ride was quiet, and I found myself watching the way frost clung to the window edges like lace. At Lily's new house, everything felt smaller but warmer. She had strung fairy lights around the windows and laid out mismatched cushions by the fireplace. There was a lived-in quality now, a softness, as if something in her had been peeled back. The baby ran to me with arms wide. "Grandma." I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that sound. We sat by the fire with bowls of lentil soup, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension threading between us. Just talk. Laughter, a retelling of memories. Midway through the evening, Lily brought out an old box. "I found this in storage," she said, setting it between us. Thought we could go through it together. Inside were fragments of my life. Photos, report cards, drawings. A cassette tape of my husband singing to Lily as a baby. Letters I had written but never sent. The history of a woman who had always been more than a mother, but who had let that title swallow every other part of her for far too long. Lily picked up one photo her on her first day of school, me crouched beside her, tying her shoelace. "You were always there," she whispered. I touched her hand. "And I still am. But now by choice." She looked at me then, not like a child seeing her parent, but like a woman seeing another woman. One who had bled and bent and built and had somehow come back to herself. We didn't need to say much more. Before I left, she walked me to the door and pulled something from behind her back. It was a framed picture. The rose bush, blooming under soft spring light taken months ago. "I had it printed," she said, "for your apartment." I took it gently. "Thank you." That night, I placed it on my kitchen wall. Below it, I wrote on a sticky note, "Things that bloom again." In the days that followed, I found myself smiling more, moving slower, watching the world without rushing to fix it. I met with my garden group for tea. I wrote letters to no one and everyone. I filled my days not with service but with substance, things that were mine. One evening, while organizing my kitchen drawer, I came across the deed to the old house. I hadn't seen it in months, just a photocopy. Nothing legal, nothing binding, but I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my journal next to Lily's first drawing of our house crayon lines, crooked but hopeful. Home, it turns out, isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a moment, a word, a glance that says, "I see you now." Sometimes it's letting go of what you built so you can finally build what you need. And sometimes it's a little boy calling a flower yours without ever knowing the whole story behind it. But you do, and that's enough. Spring came early that year. The first signs were shy buds along the garden fence, a hint of green in the ivy that curled near my window. But I felt it before I saw it. That slow lift in the chest, that inhale of air that didn't bite but whispered, "You've made it through." At the community garden, the soil had softened. I knelt beside my rose bush, now taller than I remembered. Tiny shoots reached skyward, hungry for light. I trimmed the old branches, gently whispering to the roots, like they could hear me. "You're still here, and you're still beautiful." I wasn't just talking to the roses. Ruth arrived with a tin of oatmeal cookies and her usual smirk. "You ever notice," she said, handing me one, "that the things we care for the most are usually the ones we forget to thank ourselves for?" I looked at her, brow raised. "Are you talking about the garden or my daughter?" She grinned. "Both." We sat on a bench beneath the old fig tree, sharing silence the way only women who've lived long enough can. Eventually, Ruth nudged me with her elbow. "You ever think about writing your story down? Not just in that journal you hide in your purse, but out loud. For others?" I paused. "Sometimes." "Then stop thinking. Start doing." That night, I opened my laptop. For the first time, not to scroll through family updates or grocery store flyers, but to write. Really write. I titled the document, "The Gift I Gave and the One I Took Back." The words came like breath, slow, deliberate, alive. I wrote about the house, the silence, the letter, the soup, the rose, the shift. But I didn't write it as a warning. I wrote it as a map for anyone who had lost themselves inside love and found the way out by planting something new. I shared it at the next storytelling workshop. When I finished reading, the room didn't clap. They exhaled. Afterward, a woman I hadn't met before, short hair tremor in her hands, approached me. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years," she said. "But listening to you, I don't know. Maybe I don't need to wait anymore to be okay." I held her hands. "You don't?" The ripple began there. Soon I was asked to speak at a local women's group. Then a podcast. Then an invite to write for a magazine about second acts and letting go. I didn't chase it, but I said yes when it found me. Because what I had gone through, what I chose, was not uncommon. It was just unspoken. And speaking it aloud made others braver too. One afternoon, Lily called. "I saw your name in a newsletter," she said. "You're famous now." I laughed. "Hardly." "Well," she continued, her voice softer, "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For choosing yourself. For finding something that's yours again." It was quiet on the line. Then she added, "You know I planted another rose bush." "Oh, this one's for me." I smiled so hard it hurt. Later that night, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and reread the first draft of my essay. I thought about all the times I'd given away parts of myself hoping to be loved, and how none of it was wasted. Because even if the love hadn't lasted the way I'd hoped, it had planted something. In her, in me, in everyone who had heard the story and whispered, "That's me too." I turned off the lights, let the glow of the screen fade, and said aloud into the stillness, "I gave up my house to my daughter, but I found my voice in the silence she left behind." And the silence answered, "Welcome home." The invitation came in the mail, cream-colored, handwritten, and tied with a simple satin ribbon. It was for Lily's son's 5th birthday party. Grandma, the envelope read, just that. Not Mom, not Mavis, but Grandma. A word I had once feared was slipping through my fingers now returned to me like a song I could still sing. Inside a note, "We'd love for you to be there. He's been asking if the flower lady will come." I chuckled, tracing the words with my finger. The flower lady. I could live with that. The party was held in their modest backyard, small, fenced but lively. Kids ran circles around picnic tables, chasing balloons and each other. The grill hissed and sizzled, laughter rose like a choir, and in the center of it all stood my grandson. Missing his front teeth, chocolate smeared across his chin, he grinned when he saw me. "Grandma." I scooped him up despite the aching in my knees. "Is the flower still there?" I asked. He nodded vigorously. "I check on it every day. Mommy says it's special." Lily walked over just then, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked tired but content, worn in the way only a good mother can be. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking." We stood there for a moment watching the children, the adults mingling, the sky beginning to shift into that soft golden light that always makes even the most ordinary things look sacred. Later, after cake and presents, Lily pulled me aside. "I've been reading your essays," she said. "All of them." I raised an eyebrow. "Even the ones where you don't look great?" She smiled sheepishly. "Especially those." I waited. "You were right. You know," she continued. "About everything, but mostly about love. How it's not just giving, it's being willing to witness the cost." Her eyes welled. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I didn't rush to forgive her. I didn't throw my arms around her in a movie moment embrace. I simply nodded, letting the truth of her words settle between us like soil over seed. "It's okay," I said. "We bloom in different seasons." After the party, I walked home under a dusky sky. My coat smelled faintly of charcoal and frosting. My shoes were muddy from the yard, my heart light. At home, I poured a cup of tea and opened my journal for what I thought might be the final time in this chapter. I wrote, "She never said thank you for the house, but she did plant another rose," and somehow that was louder than words. Then I closed the book and sat back in my chair, listening to the hum of the world outside my window. No noise, no drama, just the subtle breathing of life as it continues. I had given my house away, and in return, the world gave me something better. A new home inside myself, a new garden, a new voice, a daughter rediscovered, and a rose, quiet red, reaching skyward. In the end, this was never a story about real estate. It was about the unseen currency of love, the invisible weight of sacrifice that mothers, grandmothers, caretakers carry without applause. It was about the heartbreak of being taken for granted, and the quiet power of choosing to reclaim yourself not with fury, but with grace. Mavis didn't win back her house. She didn't need to. She won something far more enduring. Her identity, her voice, and the slow, tender rebuilding of a relationship that had once been lost to misunderstanding. This story asks us to reflect. Who are we when we give everything? And how do we come home to ourselves when what we gave isn't honored? If this story moved, you share it. Comment below with your own journey, your own rose, your own turning point. Someone out there needs your words as much as you once needed to be heard. Have you ever given too much without being seen? What helped you take your power back? Pin this thought. Self-worth begins where silence ends. Like, subscribe, And share Grace's truth because some stories deserve to be planted and to bloom over and over again.